Welcome back to Geek Warning, everybody. Caley Fretz. It's the week of March 28th. We've got a whole bunch of fantastic tech news to talk about with you all today. We're going to talk Taipei Cycle Show. We're going to talk about Ronan's favorite topic in the whole world, which is what if there was no tech at all? We're going to talk about spec bikes, basically, is what I'm saying. There's a new bike from Specialized that I think it needs more zerts, personally. So we'll get into that in a little bit. We've got some news from Chris King. We've got some stuff that's on our minds and over the heads of our families. And joining me here today to talk about all of this, Dave Rome. How are you, Dave?
I'm well. Hello. Good morning. Good evening.
And Ronan Mc Laughlin. How are you, man?
I'm good. Thank you.
Let's kick off today with a little bit of housekeeping, Dave. I think that, frankly, you, as a shill for SRAM, need to defend yourself.
I do. I mean, as much as I like my new Mercedes, I think it's still important to say that my opinions are my own. And really what this is just, I guess, because I was positive about the new SRAM, and I should know better than to be positive about a new product. But
how dare you?
How dare I? But yeah, I guess some people are skeptical over, I guess, our agenda. And yeah, I mean, the whole business mission of us is to be independent. And occasionally we will be positive about new things when they deserve to have positivity around them. And I think it's just important to say that our job is to give an opinion based on a background of knowledge and information, and that opinion might not always align with your opinion. And it's good to have opinions of others and to potentially take it on board of people that have used those products. So yeah, I think that's just something I wanted to get off my chest. I think the other thing that is important to remember is that continuous negativity doesn't equate to credibility. So and I think that's something that the internet has become can be quite a negative place about, and especially on YouTube, the ones that are the most negative seem to be the most credible, and I would argue that that's not necessarily always the case. That consistently shitting on things doesn't necessarily mean that you're that's more credible than someone that can explain why a product is good or when it's bad. So yeah, we will call out products when they're bad. We will call out negatives in products when they exist, as I did on that SRAM stuff. But at the same time, if we genuinely love something and we genuinely think it's a step forward, or we think it's the way the industry is going, we're going to tell you.
Dave, I don't know how to break this to you gently, so I'm just going to go ahead and say it, but we can't have conspiracy theories if we don't have negativity on the internet. So
it's true.
There's just no other way of saying that. So just as long as you know that. The other thing that you kind of skipped across there was, and the reason I'm sort of liking your opinion on this, on that particular review, was actually you had the stuff in your hands, which is kind of a big deal also. So the opinion you had was formed with writing this new group set.
Yes. Yeah. And that's, I guess, the one argument that I guess most people pointed to as to why the product was a design failure was based on a YouTuber who hadn't actually held the product in their hand and hadn't worked on it. And they've since come out with a corrections video. So it's, I think it's just something to keep in mind that we're here trying to do the best job we can. And not everyone's going to agree with our opinions, but they are honest. They're our honest opinions.
Stop being mean to Dave, internet.
Yeah, that was fine.
I kid.
You can be mean. I don't mind. Like, yeah, if you truly don't agree with my opinion, let me know. I'm happy to take that on board as well. So
well, I actually I think that this is an interesting topic because I mean, we get these sort of big launches. There's usually a couple a year, right? There's, anything big from SRAM, anything big from Shimano, anything big from some of the big bike brands. And there is this funny tendency, as you said, Dave, to sort of equate negativity with authenticity or negativity with credibility. And I think that it's an easy trap to fall into. In fact, I think back to like my early days as a tech editor, sort of, 2011, 2012, 2013, and some of the things that I wrote for VeloNews back then. And I think I actually fell in that trap early on. And you, in an effort to kind of like prove yourself and prove to the audience that you're not a shill, you end up just kind of hating things just for the sake of hating things. And it's just this, it's a funny, well, here's the thing is I think it's a result of this trust gap between the audience and endemic media that we've talked about a number of times, and is sort of a big part of it's a big part of the problem that we're trying to solve at Escape Collective. Is we're trying to close that trust gap by essentially ensuring you that our opinions are not purchased, right? And I can say 100% they're not purchased right now because I've said this elsewhere. We haven't taken a single ad dollar from anywhere in the industry. And I think it's basically, it's kind of structural, right? Like people, you can't really blame the audience for this, for seeing negativity and authenticity as the same thing, because for so long, everything's been so positive. I mean, how many reviews out there are 4 out of 5 stars, 4 paragraphs long, just garbage content, total nonsense, not helpful in any way to the end consumer. And that stuff is rife in the bike world. And that is essentially now kind of the result of that is this sort of negativity ruling the roost kind of thing. So anyway, we don't want to spend too much time on this, but I thought it was worth bringing up, not to defend your honor, Dave. I don't feel like that is actually necessary. I don't think anyone out there.
I don't have any.
Actually, I was going to say, I don't think anyone out there actually thinks that, your opinion was purchased in some way. Maybe they do. I don't know. But that's a ridiculous thing to think. But it's more that it's just a very, from a like a 10,000 foot view, just looking down at like why these things happen and why audiences have the reactions that they do, and like those are the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and I find it fascinating, and I genuinely hope that what we're doing here, I hope it can start to solve it, right? Like that's part of the idea. That's part of the mission. It'll take time, but certainly there will be a mix of positivity amongst the negativity. We can't and we won't always be negative, because the bike industry does from time to time pump out stuff that is a genuine improvement. So, expect a mix. Things that are good are still good. Well, let's stop talking about ourselves. We spent enough time talking about ourselves. I will end that segment with $150 chains are an insult to cyclists all over the world, and I hate it. So there you go. There's our bit of negativity.
So that was going to be for on my mind this week. I've come around, having seen the Australian pricing on that chain and how it compares to Shimano and Campagnolo. I have come around to changing my mind, because I kind of defended it last week, saying it's very durable. And while there's truth to that, I've mainly come around to the fact that at nearly 2.5 times the price of a 12-speed Durace chain, in an Australian retail sense, like from an Australian consumer point of view, it's absurdly overpriced.
There we go, Dave. So see how easy that is. See how easy. Just let the hate flow. I think it's much easier that way if we just decide that everything sucks and go with that.
But for the record, I did call that out in my review. I said that as a drivetrain, it's cheaper than the old one, but as replacement wear parts is that's where they've raised the prices. So I did call it out. So we're just it's just dawning on me how much. It's expensive.
It's absurd. $150 chains. It's an absurdity. Like, could you just laugh at it? I guess. I mean, it's a completely ridiculous thing. Anyway, I'm moving us on from this particular topic.
Let's go on.
We're moving on. Very sad news, which is the founder of DeRosa, Mr. DeRosa himself, passed away. I think it was over the weekend. He was 89 years old. Absolute legend of frame building, built frames for Eddie Merckx and many other huge names in bike racing history. And that brand DeRosa has definitely, it's been sort of passed around a little bit in recent years, but still exists. And just a sad thing that somebody who kind of defined the racing bicycle for a couple decades there, helped define the racing bicycle for a couple decades there, is no longer with us. So yeah, to friends and family and anybody who rides a DeRosa, we're very sorry today.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that the company will continue under Hugo's sons, who apparently have been at the helm of that company since the 70s. So still remains in the family.
Which is fantastic. Let's move on to the Taipei Cycle Show. So this just went down, obviously, in Taipei. Dave, you have had some folks send over some interesting things. We should say we weren't there. We weren't really a company fast enough to get anybody to the Taipei Cycle Show. But
No.
we've had some sneaky moles looking around at the Cycle Show. What have they dug up?
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. So I mean, Taipei Cycle Show, it's often more, I'd say more at the manufacturers' end of interest. You get a lot of manufacturers or distributors. You get a lot of like white label kind of generic brands, general manufacturers that are willing to put your brand name onto their product. So it's often a lot of walking around a huge show with a lot of interesting products that look familiar from other brands, but without that brand on it. But amongst all that, you do also get some pretty big brands that are there showing off their latest and greatest stuff. So amongst that, as actually seen on Pink Bike, FSA have new headsets, which they've basically got this huge range of various different headsets for internal cable routing. But they've also done some headsets for mountain bikes with like reach adjustment, which is something we've seen in the downhill world done before, normally with custom headsets using like custom Chris King headsets and a few other bits and pieces. So you can actually adjust the reach of your frame, assuming you have a large enough head tube to use such a headset in. There's damping headsets, which is a similar idea to like the Visco set that we've seen from Cane Creek before. And they've even got like a self-centering headset where it basically brings the handlebars back to center. So that one's really designed around like a cargo bike use. But there's just a lot of interesting developments in the headset world, and FSA seems to be really pushing forward in a big way. They've even got solutions for some of the more common integrated headset designs from like Trek and I'm struggling to remember others at the moment. But yeah, the frames that are sort of using their own integrated top caps that sit in line with aerodynamically shaped top tubes. FSA are starting to offer a range of those as well. So there's a lot of headsets happening. There's perhaps the biggest news from the mountain bike side of things was TRP released a 12-speed mechanical drivetrain, which looks pretty cool, actually.
Wasn't it on the same day as the SRAM stuff?
Yep.
Oops.
Yep. So yeah, I think oops, maybe some coincidence in it, maybe not, but I mean it coincides with the start of the Taipei Cycle Show. So yeah, the drivetrain, it's got a lot of quite neat features around it. It uses a KMC chain, which is quite cool, which opens them up to, I guess, easier equipment spec on bikes. It's using the front chainring is licensed from MRP. But yeah, it's everything else is made by them. So TRP is actually the sort of performance division, the premium division of Tektro, who make a lot of brakes. Not most, but I'd say a good portion of the brakes in the market are out of the house of Tektro. And it's an interesting product, this. It's 10 to 52 tooth cassette. It uses a lot of existing fitments, such as like a micro spline, free hub body, 30 millimeter bottom bracket standard. It will fit a regular mountain bike. And it seems like a pretty nice drivetrain, actually. It's got some really cool features that have been developed for athletes like Aaron Gwynn on the downhill circuit.
It's just sort of occurred to me that if the big two start to step away from high-end mechanical groups, that does leave a space in the market for folks who
does.
want that sort of thing. And is that what we're seeing here?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's sort of like almost a vacuum for this sort of product. And there's certainly competitors coming into the space. And dare I say that TRP is probably, or Tektro is probably one of the better placed ones to fill that void. Simply because, I mean, they're an enormous OE supplier for brakes that they've got those contracts in place. They've got the reputation for being able to supply quality, trustworthy parts. So for me, it makes sense that they're trying to get into this spot. And from what I've read so far about this drivetrain, I haven't used it yet, but what I've read is it sounds like they've done a pretty good job with it. So certainly one to watch for. And yeah, I think PRP, I wouldn't be surprised if the Tektro division is working on more affordable drivetrains as well. It seems like something that they're investing in, and for me, that's quite exciting.
There's a new KMC chain as well.
No, it was just like the one thing that caught my eye from the Taipei show was this. Actually, it won an award at the show. If you want to place any value in that or whatever, but it's a new KMC Racing Duo chainring and 12-speed chain combination, which has this new unique tooth profile from KFC that's said to better cradle the chain rollers for the
KFC. We got some Kentucky Fried Chicken up in here.
Pretty sure I said KMC, but I am a bit hungry, so I might have said KFC.
over this not so great Zoom connection, it certainly sounded like you said KFC to me. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, except I kind of did. Continue.
Well, yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it. There's like so little information on this at the moment. There was some line that I seen in the linked to the award that the new chainring and combo or chain combo won. It basically said that if I read it out, the exceptional component engagement enables a 5.2 watt energy saving, ability to ride 5% farther in the same time span. None of which sounds all that.
I'm going to come out and say it. And KMC has had some overzealous claims in years past with some of their chains.
That claim doesn't fill me with confidence that it was. I'm not sure if it was misquoted, or it wasn't from KMC. So I'm gonna reserve judgment on that one for the moment.
Those two things don't make any sense anyway, because if it's a 5 watt savings and also a 5% savings, that means the entirety of the drag across the entire rest of the system is 100 watts. Or you're only riding at 100 watts, right?
Maybe that's what they tested it at.
I'm no math guru, but pretty sure that one doesn't add up.
As I said, I'm reserving judgment on this. It's not even clear exactly. Is this road? Is it off road? What the only reason actually I know it's a 12-speed chain is because I was able to zoom in on the photo provided, and you can see 12 stamped on the outer links there. So caught my eye, but not rushing out to buy one. There was other KMC news you were going to touch on though, Dave.
Yeah, the chain I saw was KMC have released a compatible chain, 11-speed chain that's optimized around that new Shimano Link drive, which is the whole technology base to the new Shimano Qs that we discussed a few weeks ago, which is kind of that 9, 10, and 11-speed entry-level group sets that all run that 11-speed chain. And KMC have created a chain that's specifically optimized around the shift ramps and the spacing of that. So that's probably a chain that we'll see a lot of specification in years moving forward, I'd imagine. Yeah, the other interesting thing from Taipei show, I mean, KS, the company best known for their dropper seat post. If you've bought a mountain bike in the last few years, there's a high chance it might have come with a KS seat post. But they're getting into suspension forks, and they've got a gravel suspension fork, the GTC, which is 40 mil of travel, and seems to have some interesting high-end features, but is aiming to hit a price point around the $600 US mark. So I think that's interesting for anyone that actually finds suspension on gravel bikes interesting. And then last on the list is wireless droppers seem to be coming at a rapid pace. So from what I saw from coverage from the Taipei Cycle Show, KS, RST, TransX, and X Fusion are all brands that aim to release wireless droppers in the next short while. And all of those brands are, I guess, more known as sort of OE, quite affordable brands. So that suggests to me that wireless dropper technology is not going to be kept for the likes of RockShox and Magura for all that much longer.
Not excited about that.
Yeah, I bought a Reverb for my hardtail, a Reverb Axis seat post, and I truly believe it is the best dropper post on the market, assuming you ignore what it weighs and what it costs.
Right.
But function-wise, it's incredible. And then the other benefit of it, like especially for a gravel bike is where I'm thinking for this stuff, wireless means you can actually remove the seat post and put in a rigid post. So you can kind of make your bike quite adaptable in that regard. So I think that's a benefit to the wireless droppers that is rarely acknowledged, I guess, is if you've got a bike that you like to use for various applications, it does open you up to that. But yeah, understood. It's more batteries on bikes and bikes should really have fewer batteries. So
yeah. And just another thing to break, and they're also really expensive. So, I mean, if these newer options are less expensive, it's slightly more interesting to me. But
yeah,
you can get a pretty good dropper these days for like $200, and these things are all 3-4 times the cost of that. So, anyway, Ronan, you read something?
Well, I was going to say something, but now I'm just going to say that every week I hear you talk about off-road stuff that you guys hate, and I just like. Makes me more and more interested in mountain biking every time you say that. I don't know why you wouldn't want more batteries on. Like, more batteries is better.
No, more batteries is worse.
I know, but
it's way worse. It's way. The general rule is just that Ronan's going to like things that I don't like. So I think the fact that I don't like all these things makes you very interested in mountain bike technology, which it's about right. Moving on. We had some other news out of Specialized this week. We're just going to touch on this one. The patent or something. I think it was the patent for this bike popped up months ago. It was a very strange looking frame. Turns out it's the new Sirius, which is how would you describe the Sirius range? It's like
it's like a recreational commuter flat bar bike.
Like 10 years ago, we would have called them hybrids. Yeah. But they're not hybrids anymore. That doesn't exist anymore. But interesting frame design, because you get basically what they have done is they have like moved the rear triangle or extended the rear triangle halfway through the seat tube to make the whole thing flexi-bendy. That's the technical term, by the way.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, the seat tube is interrupted. So the seat tube doesn't connect through to the bottom bracket because that area you've got where the seat post goes, and then that's all of a sudden interrupted, and it's basically almost like the what would you call it? Like probably the seat stays effectively then taking over that position and then connecting to the midway through the down tube. So you've got still, in a sense, a triple triangle, but it's a different orientation of triangles. This is one of those bikes that is like not great for podcast form.
Go look at a picture of it. Actually, even better. Go to Bicycle Pubes on Instagram, one of our favorite Instagram accounts, because he has drawn this with zerts on the inside and the inside of all the frame holes, which anybody who was around in sort of the early zerts era, the sort of 2010 Roubaix launch kind of zone, I don't know, you'll gain great appreciation for the zerts Sirius. I think more zerts the merrier, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. So yeah, I think this bike is interesting. Part of what's interesting to me is that Rondo, sort of brand best known for its gravel bikes, they recently released a new model called the Rut, which uses a very similar concept for the frame shaping. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes with through similar bikes in the market and whether there's any sort of illegal implications there. But yeah, I think it's an interesting design, and I think moving forward, it's almost certain that Specialized are sort of playing with the concept in sort of a low risk category. And you can imagine that if there are indeed legitimate performance benefits or comfort benefits here, that we'll probably see this frame shape adapted for other applications.
Is it actually a low risk category? I wonder what sales numbers are for these bikes versus like a Diverge. Because yeah, for our audience and for us, a Diverge is a much more prominent bicycle. But if you just walk into your average Specialized shop, I bet they sell a lot of these things. I don't think this is a particularly low risk category for them.
No,
so they must be pretty confident in it.
I think historically it's probably a high volume category, but like sort of low profit, I guess. For me, I would imagine that these days that this category has been eroded greatly by e-bikes. And I wouldn't imagine it's as high volume as it used to be. I think it probably is still a high volume category in the US, but at least I'm thinking specifically for Australia, Specialized aren't a strong competitor in this space purely because of price. Like that market's very price driven, and this bike, we're talking about a carbon fiber frame that's designed for a recreational rider. It's normally typically priced out of where most people buying this sort of bike look. Ronan?
Yeah, but I haven't actually looked at this at all yet. But I'm, when listening to you guys talking about this category, I'm sort of naturally thinking, is whatever benefit this is offering going to be valuable to the customer in this price category looking for this type of bike? Are they, is it something that you're going to sense when you get on the bike for a ride, if that's the type of bike that you're after? And if not, is it is this purely something that makes the bike stand out, look different, and actually help sales in that way?
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, yeah, unique aesthetics to go a long way to, it's differentiation. But it's at the same time, yeah, I think the goal here is in theory frame comfort, and that's certainly going to be a good selling feature for this category and for many other categories. So, but yeah, I think fundamentally, it's not the sort of bike we'd normally talk about, but just because it's so radically different and what it could mean for future bikes, I think it is interesting.
Needs more Zerts. Not interested until we get twice as many Zerts as we currently have. I want to move on to our kind of bigger discussion today, which is actually based on a story that Ronan has written. It will be on the website probably before this podcast goes up, I would assume. I think Joe is taking a look at it this afternoon. Well, Ronan, why don't you explain what the task was here?
The task, much to my horror, was to investigate what would happen if all professional cyclists rode the exact same equipment. That was as detailed as the brief got. I then have only myself to blame for going down countless rabbit holes and investigating, if you did want to introduce what is sort of commonly known at least within motorsports as a spec series championship, where I at least thought it existed in karting. It turns out not so much, but actually once you get into the single seater levels, you have spec series where all the drivers have one chassis manufacturer to choose from, one engine manufacturer, basically one type of car that they can race in, and they can tweak it and all as they see fit. But the idea is that there's a sort of a level playing field there, and it hopefully extenuates raw talent, and that's the goal there. So yeah, I started then wondering, well, if you wanted to standardize equipment in cycling, does that mean just the bike? Does that mean just the frame? Does that mean wheels? Does it mean clothing? Does it mean all the different aero accessories and marginal gains that we have nowadays? And what was the implications of standardizing such equipment? And what way would you want to standardize? Would you want to go back to round tube steel frame? Why can't I say that? You know what I mean. steel frames with round tubes and 32 spoke tubular wheels, or would we want to standardize everybody to some sort of modern aero bike from today's peloton, and how going one direction or the other might favor one type of rider over another, and how it might impact professional cycling as a whole. And turned into a bit of a mammoth. Basically took me 2 weeks to complete it. I'm not even sure if I did complete it, but I got it to a point where I just could not go back to it again. So what's there now is all you're getting. And I open the floor to questions.
No, I was trying to. I mean, I haven't read it enough to even really understand what you cover, but it's.
Caley, you have read it.
Well, I think I have read it. I think it's an interesting question. Not only have I read it, but I think I was the one that assigned it to you, and that was that was purposeful. I thought that you would probably take it the most seriously, mostly because you would want to debunk it, and so it turned out to be the case. You talked to some really interesting folks. You talked to Jack Aitken from sort of the driving world. I just think it's an interesting discussion, right? Because, well, let's go through some of the things that you kind of came out of it with, right? I think the biggest for me was that it's basically impossible to actually create like a spec category of bike racing, because one of the sort of recurring themes that you kept coming back to was you can have the same, basically, quote unquote, the same bike, same equipment. And if you have one rider who is 55 kilos and 5'2", and another rider who's 90 kilos and 6'2", like you're no longer in spec, right? Like you're no longer all riding the same thing. And that was, I think, one of the most interesting things to me was that this is, while an interesting concept from a, helping juniors get into the sport and all the other things that sort of in theory it could help with, it starts to break down really quickly.
I think the way to overcome that would be to have everyone race like a 20-inch wheeled street bike, like a Cannondale Hooligan comes to mind. Hooligan or Hoonigan? Okay, Hooligan.
Must be a Hooligan.
Yeah, so that would be one way, because that is a bike that allows you with its 6 meter long seat post to adjust the fit to anyone.
But see what you haven't realized there is what I hadn't realized until someone pointed out to me, is that actually even if you went for that bike, the wheel size wouldn't change for the rider size, and so the proportion of bike to rider, given that the wheels are the biggest part of the bike, is still significantly more for a smaller rider. And then you start getting into the rabbit holes that I find myself in, and wondering, is a smaller rider aided by moving to a round tube because they have less draggy tubes, or is a smaller rider hampered by the same move, or is a taller rider, if you go the other way, is a taller rider aided by moving to aero tubes because they have more of those aero tubes in crosswinds and different yaw angles that could actually start getting some sort of a sail effect. And the fact that they haven't got the round draggy tubes and they've got much more tube, that plays into their favor also.
Caley, why did you let Ronan open this Pandora's box?
Well, one of the other interesting things, you talked to Josh Portner, and he was saying, he was sort of like just chucking out this hypothesis that maybe effectively having something that was kind of like a spec bike in the 80s, right? Because bikes were just what I was basically all identical. Maybe that was why, in general, we had slightly larger riders finding success in that era. And also these small riders were generally more pigeonholed into just climbing versus there's some quite small riders who do well outside of direct climbs these days. Because basically the theory being that they were being excessively harmed by the bikes that they were riding. Like they're heavier for compared to body weight. The aero stuff you were just talking about. It is really a Pandora's box when you start to dig all the way into it.
I think we had scheduled like a 15 or 20-minute call with Josh just to sort of run these questions by him, get his opinion on a couple of different things, and have a few quotes from him for the feature. And it was about 5 minutes into the conversation that I think we both realized he hadn't anticipated exactly how seriously I was taking this, and I won't say he was stumped by any of the questions, because he certainly provided plenty of interesting and thought-provoking answers there. But he certainly, he moved to another room, sat down, got out the spreadsheet, got out the calculator. He definitely had to go deeper than he was planning. And yeah, to that point, he then sort of came to the conclusion that you might see a return to riders specializing in different disciplines and being pigeonholed into disciplines and sort of having their opportunities restricted. And the other thing that we sort of both agreed on was that actually, if we want to know what spec series bike racing would be like, at least in terms of aerodynamics and having heavy bikes, all we have to do is look at anything pre-Champs-Élysées 1989, because before that, apart from Moser's R record or something like that, they're for all intents and purposes, although the riders might have thought there was quite a lot of differences between their bikes back then, there really wasn't. Everybody was more or less on spec equipment. Obviously you would have geometry differences and stuff like that, but in terms of aerodynamics, everybody was on the same bike.
I think the more nostalgic listeners out there might say that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to go back to that era.
You'd be surprised, because admittedly a quick Twitter poll, you've got all recent bias and all that sort of creeps in there. But I did ask on a Twitter poll, what was your favorite era of bike racing, or what was the most exciting era of bike racing, and give a few options, and 60% of the respondents said the decade that we're living in now has been the most exciting. That Pogacar might have a lot to do with that, but and it's not exactly a valid study or anything. But I certainly thought that a lot of my following would have come back and said, the 80s or 70s or Merckx era or whatever. Well, Merckx era probably wasn't all that exciting, but I was expecting a different era. Yeah.
How old is your Twitter following, Ronan?
My Twitter account is older than you might think. My Twitter account is old enough that I've got my own name. So, wow.
I think, fundamentally, the big issue here is that the way the entire sport of cycling is funded.
Yes.
None of this is a reality.
That was kind of the example in the article is just think about if every professional rider had to ride one of the Shimano or Mavic neutral service bikes, that would be fine, because everybody has a bike. They're all the same. They're all, they're fine bikes for racing on or whatever. But Shimano, even with all of its might, could not replace all the sponsorship revenue that the teams are getting from their current bike manufacturer deals. They're not just getting bikes, they're getting, sometimes upwards of €2 million in addition to all the bikes that they're getting, and Shimano can't replace that for every team, and so you could end up bankrupting quite a few teams just by going this way. You've also got the fact just that there's so much infrastructure and business and bike shops, and if you want to go far enough, that's one of the beauties about cycling, but it's also one of the things that makes this impossible, is that the bike that the Tour de France winner is riding in July, you can walk into a bike shop and buy the same bike. And where spec series racing exists elsewhere, like Formula 4, Formula 3, Formula 2, and like the Volvo Great Ocean Race and those, at least there is at least one sailing race that has a spec series. Also, you don't have people walking and buying these things, from local dealerships or whatever. That economy just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You guys, are you familiar with Little 500?
Only from you've mentioned a couple of times.
From Breaking Away. You still haven't seen Breaking Away? You have to see Breaking Away. We're gonna watch it in Belgium next week.
No, we're not.
It's gonna be our Tuesday night Go buy some doubles and watch them breaking away, sitting around our hotel in Belgium. So Little Five is it's around a cinder track, and it's teams of 4, and it is a spec bike. It's like literally everyone gets the same Schwinn with a coaster brake and flat pedals, and you can't really adjust anything. I think you could maybe each team gets 2 bikes. Maybe you have like a tall one and a short one, basically. But basically, you gotta like pick who the bike fits and who the bike doesn't fit, and part of it is finding a team of people that are all similar size. And if you actually want sort of an example of what it looks like, that's what it looks like. Granted, it's for one race a year. It's a quite unique circumstance, but it is kind of cool from that perspective. Like, you end up with this situation where, you know, you get kind of like cyclists, right, joining and doing this thing, but you also just get like all the fraternities and sororities have a team, and a lot of people do that bike race, and it's the only bike race that they'll ever do in their entire lives. They might become cycling fans. Like I covered this race in 20. It was for Velo News, like 2017, 2018. And because a friend of mine had done it, and I went back with him, and I'm still in a chat group today with a bunch of those guys who are from this team, most of whom don't ride all that much anymore. If they do, then maybe they run a whole bunch or they ride a little bit. They're not like hardcore bike racers, right? And you know, and that event did make them into cyclists. They started as runners, they started in some other sport. They were just good athletes, and they found cycling through this particular thing. It didn't necessarily keep them around in the way that like we were kept around always. Some certainly were, but it's still an interesting idea from that perspective, I think. And you did, you know, there's some quotes in there from Chad Cheney, who's a guy actually local to me, that talks about like the power of some sort of spec bike or cheap, consistently good bike for getting new folks into the sport. And I think that is the one area that is really worth discussing. I don't think pros on identical bikes helps anything, but I do think that, yeah, that getting new riders on a bike that they just know is going to be good is a really interesting idea.
I will say that those in the Little Five that have to ride the smaller bike that are that size, you know, what I understand now is that they have been cheated. So, you know, I don't know if you want to tell them that or not, but really they never stood a chance. Anyway,
they're on flat pedals with a coaster brake. I don't think that's
aero is everything.
The biggest problem.
Aero is everything. No, what I was just going to say is there's actually a heck of a lot more in the article. So just, you know, listening to this segment does not cover it in its entirety. There was actually a couple of things that came up that potentially have a bit more opportunity in them. The likes of the Jack Aiken introduced me to balance of performance, something that's used in World Endurance Car Championship that maybe could work. And the other thing that came up was some sort of a aero equipment restriction where, I don't know, something along the lines of if you won the Tour de France last year, you're not allowed anything deeper than a 30mm rim for the following year, and you're not allowed an aero frame. And
that's funny. What, not to keep staying on this topic, but random thought I just had was, imagine if, and in line with what Caley was saying with making cycling more accessible, imagine if there was like a retail value cap on the bikes pros could ride. You know, like if every pro had to have a bike that retailed for $15,000 or under, or something like that.
I'll make it way more fun than that. Make it like $3,500. That would be hilarious.
I'm just trying to think of a price point where Pinarello could still remain in the World Tour.
Well, but like that would be a really interesting. I mean, that's an interesting story, right? Like, because that is, particularly if you put the number low enough, that's what we all did as amateurs, right? Where we were like, I mean, you know, sitting around in college, I have $27 to my name. How do I make my aluminum crit bike faster? Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's where we all got our start. Because I think one of the primary points, and then the real thing that not that I really needed any convincing, but like the best argument against any of these spec bike things is the fact that tech is fun,
Yeah.
and the fact that doing these little upgrades and figuring out how to make your bike, whatever budget you're on, make your bike a little bit better is part of the fun. And that's one of the things that Chad Cheney said in this story, is that that includes juniors, because we had kind of posited like, okay, well, what if there's just spec bike for juniors because it would help kids get into the sport and whatever else. And he's like, nah, like 16-year-olds like tech just like the rest of us do, right? And they like that side of the sport, and it's equipment is such a huge part of cycling that taking that away, I think is to the detriment of the sport as a whole.
Like for me, the actual thing that got me into cycling was just seeing some guy out riding a road bike with triangular handlebars on the front. Turned out to be time trial bars. That might explain a lot, but anyway, that so at a young age, tech and time trial had already gripped me. But I think it comes back to the same thing, Dave, and that I didn't include that a retail cap within the article, but I think it comes back to the same thing. And actually, like it or not, we the customer walking into local bike shops buying these bikes at ridiculous prices is the first of all, we're indirectly funding the pros who are riding these bikes, and part of the reason they're so ridiculously priced is because if Team Sky or Ineos, whatever they're called now, need 150 dogmas a year or whatever it might be, somebody has to pay for that, and so you might just indirectly have the same effect as sort of cancelling out all the manufacturers and all the innovation and marketing spend and sponsorship spend that they bring to the sport. The reason I wanted to answer that here is because I am not doing that article.
Go check out the story that Ronan put together. It's up on escapecollective.cc right now. If you're not already a member, sign up. Come on now. You listen to this podcast all the time. You should definitely be a member of Escape Collective. So go do that.
Caley, on that, this podcast we give out for free. For us, it's almost our promotional mechanism to get members to help fund our mission, in a sense.
Yep. It's deeply cynical. It's the only reason we make it.
We love making it, and I think it serves a role to entertain and inform people, but at the same time, I mean, we don't have advertising on here because in theory, we are the one that holds the advertising spot of this podcast, right? So for people listening, how much does it cost us to make each episode?
Well, about an hour and a half of each of our time. We'll call it 2 hours of each of our time because there's some prep involved and then editing time. Hard costs on each episode is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 to $700.
Okay, which is really what? That's 5 memberships an episode.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. So yeah, just food for thought. If you are listening and not a member, your membership does help make this podcast happen. Even if you consume nothing else, it makes this happen.
Yeah. Kelly, are you accounting for overtime, given that it's almost 10:30 at night? right now, and Kelly or Dave, I know it's
Ronan,
pretty early for
this
you.
is cycling media. You'll get a branded bidon if you're lucky.
That I should say that number is just not even back of the napkin math, just like back of my forehead math. But it's probably about that. If you take into account all of the expenses involved in running a media company, and you start to like divvy that out by hours and things like that, it adds up fast. I mean, this is a like 7-figure operation, Escape Collective, and yeah, that's why we need a heck of a lot of you to sign up and be members, because this is a 7-figure operation, and that's what it takes. Like, we could have done it with 3 of us in the back of a shed, and it would not be the product that I think a lot of people were hoping for. We kind of went big, right? And we did that for a lot of reasons. One was to provide work for a lot of our friends and colleagues who no longer had it. But 2 is because I think there's sort of a minimum number of editors you need to have a truly viable product. If you're not going to be kind of a one-man show, you're not going to post one thing a day or one thing every other day. If you're going to be a one-stop shop, we needed to be this kind of scale, and that takes a lot of money. So yeah, if you haven't signed up yet, go do so. Every single person counts. Like I'm sitting here watching them tick in and essentially doing the math on how quickly we get to various targets, and then therefore how quickly we can add additional beats. And like that's the thing that really motivates me right now, is the more of you sign up, the quicker we get to essentially like break even, which we're not at yet. And the sooner we get there, the sooner we can start to expand. And I'm excited about that. Before we wrap up today, what is on your mind and over the head of your family?
What's been on my mind is that I think I like power meters on mountain bikes.
I definitely like power meters on mountain bikes.
As of recently. So I've tried them before. I've tried pedals. I've tried left-sided cranks. Tried a couple of spiders. And all of them either had reliability issues, or like in the case of the pedals, they increased the stack height too much. So I find myself smashing the pedals more often than I'd like to. All of them had negatives, and not to go back to that, the people that bought me my Mercedes-Benz, but SRAM's new power meter has kind of changed my mind on this, where I think we're finally getting to a point where you can have a power meter on a mountain bike without any obvious disadvantage other than price. And I think that is exciting, because power meters on mountain bikes is really good information, and especially given that the way you ride a mountain bike, it's a lot more peaky, I guess, in terms of the power output.
Stochastic.
What?
Stochastic.
Is that what you call it?
Yeah, like more up and down and less consistent.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I think that's, you don't really realize how much you're exerting yourself, or that you need to factor that in when you've got a sustained climb. And I think it gives you some really valuable information, and allows you to conserve yourself if you're riding mountain bikes for long distances. So I'm all for seeing power come to the mountain bike category in the way it has in the road.
I didn't realize it wasn't there already.
It wasn't there?
Well, I didn't realize it wasn't
semi-available.
Yeah. I guess wrongly assumed it was just at the same shitty level that road power meters are at.
No, it's really been a fringe product. Like Stages have probably had the best success in getting adoption, but for me, like Stages has some reliability issues that have kept me from using them on my mountain bike. And it just goes back to, there just aren't many great options that you can just know that every time you get on your bike and you start to pedal, you're going to have reliable data. And I'm just keen to see that happening.
Yeah, and I think that culturally, mountain bike is more on the opposite end of the spectrum from power meters, but I think there's actually a fair number of folks out there who do fit within the power meter realm and ride a lot of mountain bikes. There's a lot of cross country riders out there who like this sort of information, but still, like when the predominant culture is, this is no offense intended to our former colleagues and good friends over at Pink Bike, but like when that is the dominant culture within a space, that's not really conducive to like a lot of power meter tech nerdery, right? So it's not too surprising. Like you rock up to your average trailhead, you're not going to see a lot of power meters. The rate of power meter usage is probably 1/10 of what it is compared to like your average road group ride, for example.
Yeah, even if you rock up to a cross-country race these days, like a club-level cross-country race, you might only see a small handful of power meters in use. And I think the other thing here is that I think they actually have a really important role moving forward in the enduro space. I think that could be quite an interesting one, because enduro is basically downhill racing with pedaling, neutralized climbs in between. And I think power meters could be used to really ensure that they're saving the energy on those neutralized sections.
And I guess obviously improve their training in that also, but or focus their training even. But so is it just improved accuracy that you think is what SRAM's bringing now that you like, or what is it do you think is actually?
It's, for me, it's the no compromise. So like there's like in the case of that XXSL spider-based chainring, the only downside other than price is like a 60-ish gram penalty. And that's literally it. Otherwise, you wouldn't know that the power meter's on the bike. There's no real other cost beyond that weight and price. Whereas in the past, it's sort of the main thing was reliability, I would say. Like every time you'd get on your bike, it would often be something you'd have to fuss with that, like, might have a connectivity issue, or maybe because you're consistently washing a mountain bike, you might have had water ingress. The other side of it is that, some of them just weren't that robust to being hit against things. As mentioned, the pedals are in perfect solution because they all have negatives in the way of like increased stack height, which on a mountain bike, increased stack height's not great in biomechanical sense, but on a mountain bike it means that your ground clearance is reduced, so you're more likely to actually hit the pedal when you're climbing technical climbs and that type of thing. So for me, it's I'm not going to say that SRAM are the first to create a off-road power meter that's actually worth having, but I think they're the first to do it in such a large scale that'll actually see adoption rates change.
Bork's had mountain bike stuff for a while. Like there's been crank based stuff for a while, and this is not like this is an iterative thing for sure. Yes. But I think that every step pushes the sort of, again, like the cross country world in particular, a little bit closer to having these things be ubiquitous. I still think stages made the biggest impact on the power meter market of anybody in the last 10 years.
Absolutely.
Right? They were the first ones to show up and be like, hey, here's a power meter for $300. And that made a huge difference to like on the road side. And I think, I it hasn't fully happened on the mountain bike side. Again, I think a lot of that's cultural. And just like the type of rider that is attracted to mountain biking. But more availability is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Ronan, do you have something on your mind and over the head of your family?
I do, yes. Since that conversation, I've had Training and Racing with a Power Meter book on my mind, because you used the word stochastic, and other than Matt Stevens, myself, and now you, I can't think of anybody else on the planet who's ever used that word. So you've put that book where I first read that word. You put that book back in my mind. The actual thing I was going to bring up here is what I'm going to call dumb gloves, because I believe, at least now that we're in the year 2023, and with all the technology that we have, and as far as we have evolved as a race, the fact that my glove still can't control my touchscreen phone is highly, highly, highly frustrating. And I know there are some gloves available that have like a magic finger in them or whatever that works with a touchscreen, but why is that just not all gloves? So like 10 years ago, I had a pair of gloves that was specifically designed to work with touchscreen. Why do I not just have that in all my gloves? I literally don't have a pair anymore that work, and so when I'm out on the bike, if I need to skip a song even or whatever with my phone, I have to take my gloves off. Like, come on, it's 2023.
It's a good point. I mean, like first iPhone was what, 2007 release, and a pretty quick adoption after that. So it's a very good point that why after 15 years or more, why aren't our gloves working with the technology that everyone has? On that note, are there any gloves that you've had that with a smartphone touchscreen,
the
little
literally
doohickey that actually works?
Literally the only pair I've ever had was like a pair of North Face gloves that I got as a Christmas present from my sister in like 2010 when I first got an iPhone. And I said I don't have any gloves. I still have those gloves somewhere, but the magic thing has like worn off. It was like an application, and it's long since gone. But it just struck me that I've got quite a few pairs of gloves from quite a few different cycle clothing manufacturers, and none of them come with this feature as a standard, which it's kind of as necessary as grip is on a glove these days.
Yeah,
I have some from Sportful. I think they are. I'm pretty sure they're Sportful. That have like little stuff in the fingers, and they work great.
Mm.
Can you
There you
use
go.
your phone as well as if you were barehanded?
I mean, no, because there's
Mm.
the end of the glove is fatter.
You haven't got
right.
the
So like
dexterity.
yeah,
Yeah.
the dexterity, but like I don't need
No.
need to like type stuff.
Mhm.
I just need to like swipe open, turn the camera on, hit next in a song, whatever, right?
I just need to
don't-
stop
I would
spitting on
say
my
good
film
enough.
to try and make it work.
I mean, I think all you have to do is just a little like electrical. You just need to put like a little bit of metal filament in between the two, right? So can't be that difficult. Actually, the gloves I have that work the best for that are from Tracksmith, and they're running gloves. But they're also very thin, so not, and they're not like windproof or anything because they're running gloves. Actually, I cross country ski in them a fair amount when it's warm out, like warm being basically above freezing. Yeah, and they work. They're tight and they're not clunky, and they work like second skin. Basically, they're great.
This is slightly borderline embarrassing to do in public because but this is kind of what like Siri and equivalent assistants are for. They can open the camera for you, and then you can use the side buttons on your phone.
Then you have to talk to yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm saying like it's it's probably something you want to do more on a solo mountain bike ride than in a road group, but it is an option.
Have you ever tried it with an Irish accent, Dave? It doesn't work all that well.
I'm going to try it later. Actually, I'll give it a go.
We had some problems with our TV and broadband subscription recently, and they had to send a new set-top box, which came with new firmware updates and a new remote, which is absolutely garbage. Like I only thought the previous one was poorly designed, but this new iteration is just like the only good parts from the previous design have now gone, and what you're left with is a step back in time. Like the only thing it's missing is like a remote controller with just two buttons that only do volume, and you have to like go to the TV to change the channel. Anyway, I'm getting slightly off topic. The point I was going to make was that when the engineer came out to fix the newly delivered but also newly broken set-top box, because it, like, of course it did, it failed within like 48 hours. I sort of, knowing that it wasn't the engineer's problem or the engineer's job or whatever, I was just sort of asking him this, and he's like, "Oh yeah, it's terrible." But what a lot of people don't realize is that you can talk to it. And I was like, "Let me stop you there. I am not talking to my remote control to tell it which TV channel I want."
I refuse. You know what? The Wahoo watch connects to my phone and solves the next song problem.
The next song problem isn't the biggest because most headphones will do it. The new Garmin 1040 also has that feature built into it where you can skip track, pause track, increase, decrease volume. Another thing that has a terrible touchscreen interface. Touchscreen seems to work everywhere else except for the section that is supposed to fix the problem with the touchscreen on your phone. I don't know why, but I just can't get the skip track or the volume to just work consistently on the 1040. It takes a lot of touching, especially when you're wearing gloves. But yeah, there are options at least for song music control.
I'm glad we spent time for this.
Good. Caley, what's on your mind?
What's on my mind is I'm trying to live Dave Rome's best life, and I thoroughly cleaned the whole drivetrain on my travel bike.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you went out and bought some nice torque wrenches.
I did not do that. I would never. I have a finely tuned hand torque wrench, and I've never broken anything. So thank you very much. No, I tore the drivetrain down and cleaned it all out, and it actually wasn't that bad because I had mostly been using like squirt on it, so wax based, just the bottle that I had. So yeah, cleaned it all off, and I went to try to apply. Ceramic Speed sent some of their, was it the UFO drip stuff? They sent a box over recently, and I was like, sweet. This comes highly recommended. I want to keep this thing clean. I'm headed to Belgium on Thursday. Went to try to put some on, and it was I was outside working in my backyard. It was probably 2 or 3 degrees and sunny. So not uncomfortable for me, but obviously the metal parts were quite chilly. Went to drip this lube on, and like basically like one link at a time, right? Trying to do it very carefully and very Dave Rome like. And I dropped it on the top, and it just froze immediately in like this sort of cone off the top of the chain. And then I went and Dave, you then informed me that the operating temperature of this lube is like some very narrow and extremely far from what I was.
So it's not as bad. So this is version 2 drip wax, which I really like as a product. The first version, their original speed applicator lube, had a very, very narrow range. It basically had to be applied at room temperature. But this one, I'm just looked it up. It's 5 to 35 degrees Celsius is the operating temperature, which is not that narrow. It's just you need to be indoors when you're in Durango in the middle of winter. So
it was probably close to 5. It was probably 3 or 4. And it definitely,
I would say the way that bottle froze, or the way it didn't hit the chain, it's probably less than you thought it was.
I bet the chain was colder. Yeah, it was in the shade prior. Oh.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is not something that had actually occurred to me, that you have to I mean, obviously, if you stop and think about it for 2.5 seconds, you're like, yeah, wax doesn't work in the cold. At least you can't apply it in the cold. But it was a good reminder that I need to put that on inside.
Yeah,
or else it's not going to do anything, because it just didn't go into the links at all, right? It just sat on top, and if the second I start to pedal, it's all just going to fall off again. So that's not a very helpful situation.
Yeah, so it might be this time of year, if you can only apply lubricant outside in the snow, it might be worth sticking with a wet lube rather than trying to use a wax lube.
Dave, did you say 20 plus degrees Celsius?
So the current stuff, the UFO drip version 2 is 5 to 35 degrees Celsius.
But the previous one was 20 plus.
The previous one was there was a very narrow range. It was basically room temperature. Room temperature or warmer, from memory. I could be mistaken on that, but it was incredibly narrow range.
Sounds anti-Irish to me.
Yeah, 20 plus degrees. You have like 2 days per year you can use it in Ireland.
Yeah, well, you better have stock up on those chains then. So
well, the new one, 5
do a year's worth of chains on that one day.
If the new one works above 5 degrees Celsius, we'll get 10 days of the year where we can use it. So that's improvement.
So your TV doesn't understand what you're saying, and you can't even apply a chain lube. What?
And my fingers don't work.
Why would you?
Anyway, that was equal parts PSA and on my mind because PSA, don't try to apply wax lube in the cold. There you go.
Okay, I had a different PSA. Do you want to hear it?
What's your actual PSA, Dave?
Your saddle is a wear item. I think most people don't think about this, and they think that a saddle is a forever product because it doesn't necessarily move in the same way like a bearing or a chain or brakes do. But it is actually a wear item, and it's not uncommon for saddle sores or for unbalance based injuries to appear based on saddle wear. So there's 2 common forms of saddle wear. That's shell based wear, so where the shell loses its rigidity and its structure and actually starts to flex too much, and what then happens is you end up sagging into the saddle and often placing all of the pressure on the front area that's actually reinforced by where the saddle rails join. That's bad news. The other one is the padding of the saddle that does wear out and that does collapse, and it normally collapses first on the side that most people are slightly unbalanced on the saddle, and it'll collapse on one side that you favor first, so it'll end up exaggerating any imbalances that you have. So yeah, it's just a reminder that if your saddle is starting to feel like it's softer on one side or less padded on one side, or it's flexy in the middle and it's like bottoming out onto the seat post, then it's time for a new one.
They generally look a bit worse for wear also. When at least the saddles I've seen that I'm like, yeah, you need a new saddle. You can tell almost before you even check it that it's a well worn saddle.
Yep. So visually, if it's looking all tatted and faded, then that's probably a sign that you've had your use out of it as well. But But yeah, it's more than cosmetics as to replace it. That's the PSA.
There you go. There's your PSA for the day, and that's the end of this episode. I think we're gonna wrap up there. Ronan and I are headed to Belgium this week, so we'll have some special tech episodes from Flanders and Roubaix, and maybe some recon and things like that next week. That may replace the regular Geek Warning episode. I don't think we've decided yet. Probably depends on whether we can all connect or not.
There may be a chance of having 2 separate episodes where another tech editor, part of the Escape Collective, he's quite new to the space, James Huang. Yeah, we've hired him. He's a rookie. We'll be training him up, Ronan and I, but might be coming back off his time off, and maybe James and I will connect, and yourself, Caley, and Ronan will connect separately, and we can have a podcast battle where we see whose episode's better.
Well, I was going to share the operating temperature of honey, which is something I've just Googled. But if we're going to have a podcast battle next week, I'm going to keep that nugget of information.
You want to keep that? That's not fair. Keeping people on the hook like that.
Gotta save that one. All right, I'm calling it a day. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back next week with 1, possibly 2, possibly 3 episodes. Nobody knows. But if you're subscribed, you'll get them all. All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yes.